Curious Lloyd.
In general, this is how you would solve a mystery. You take an apparently unusual circumstance and separate it into its segment parts, anchoring together a progression of normal occasions until the point that they make even the most uncommon conditions appear to be sensible. However, that is just if everything works out as expected. But now and again, you unearth a secret and start examining, just to locate that each mystery is more unusual than the last. The groin punch that was heard all around the world. In 2010, oilman and generally well-regarded Ed Flanagan was found dead in his hotel room in Texas. Since the only injury he initially seemed to have was a small abrasion in his face, it was generally assumed he succumbed to a heart attack or something. But then, the post-mortem revealed that Flanagan's interiors were a complete mess. Apart from some massive bruising around his groin and a small cut on his scrotum, there were also severe internal injuries, including 2 broken ribs and a ruptured heart. The injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma, as if it was from a beating. However, there was no bruising on the chest, only around the groin, so the only thing I can think of here is, did someone kick this guy in the balls so hard that he died? Well, the investigators were able to place a time of death soon after 8:30 p.m, but 3 electricians staying in the room next door hadn't heard of any kind of struggle. But also, a cigarette had burned out in Flanagan's hand, as if he died in the middle of a casual smoke. So how could a man be beat to death in a locked hotel room while holding a cigarette without making a sound? Well, there's no real way to put this gently. Ed Flanagan was shot in the scrotum. So with the police stumped, Flanagan's family called in a private investigator, Ken Brennan. Now, one of Ed's neighbours did hear something odd, a loud crack, like a gunshot. Brennan started sniffing around and managed to find a small bullet hole in the wall between the rooms, cleverly concealed with what turned out to be dried toothpaste. The electricians in the other room had been drinking, and one of them, Lance Mueller, fired a shot which went straight through the wall separating their rooms from Flanagan's. The electricians thought they heard a cough from another room, so they figured out that the occupant was alright and hastily masked the hole in the wall with what they could find, hence the toothpaste, and took their party to a bar, all without thinking to check on Flanagan. The bullet went through the wall and hit Flanagan square in the sack while he was lying on the bed watching Iron Man 2. It entered his body and ricocheted up through it, causing massive internal injuries until finally lodging itself in his heart. Meanwhile, the soft skin of his scrotum swelled and folded around the bullet hole. Seeing no entry wound and having no reason to assume there was one, that's probably why the coroner didn't even bother looking for a bullet. The clever plot, straight out of CSI. In 2008, Red Lobster executive Thomas Hickman was found dead in the New Mexico desert. His mouth was bound with duct tape, and he'd been shot once in the back of the head. It seemed like a classic gangland murder, but there was no particular reason why anyone would want to kill Hickman. Also, aside from the whole executed in the middle of the desert thing, the area seemed oddly serene. Hickman's hands were united, and there was no sign of struggle anywhere in the area. His car was on the scene, completely untouched. It's like his killers had concurred him into dying without a fight, then disappeared without a trace. You could say it was like an episode of CSI, but actually, it was an episode of CSI. In a season 4 episode of the show, Homebodies, a man kills himself with a gun tied to a bunch of helium balloons, which floats away into the sky after he pulls the trigger. Asking is obviously not an option, so it's not clear whether Hickman saw the episode or came up with the idea himself, but his plan was identical to the one in the show. He tied a lightweight gun to a bunch of balloons, duct taped his mouth shut, and shot himself in the back of the head. The police found notes which told his family what to do if something happened to him, so the idea was probably to spare them the pain of dealing with his suicide and allowing his wife, who had been seriously ill, to collect his $400,000 life insurance policy. Hickman might have pulled off his perfect suicide if it wasn't for the fact that it was a very unusual windy day. Instead of rising up into the sky and drifting away to some distant ravine or an unfortunate child's birthday party, the wind dragged the balloons and the gun along the ground until they became tangled in a cactus. Investigators found them a short distance from the body and presumably only briefly arrested the cactus. The saintly mother and sick child who were neither. To the people of Springfield, Missouri, Dee Dee Blanchard was a hero. She dedicated her life to caring for a chronically ill daughter, Gypsy, who suffered from chromosomal defects, muscular dystrophy, eye problems, epilepsy, severe asthma, sleep apnea, and brain damage, among other ailments. She even had leukemia as a child. The improbably frail Gypsy used a wheelchair to get around and often needed a feeding tube and an oxygen tank. As if that wasn't enough, Dee Dee's other family abused Gypsy until Dee Dee herself stood up to them. They then fled to her hometown with a daughter in tow. Their new home was destroyed in Hurricane Katrina, but Dee Dee bravely carved out a new life for them in Missouri. So the whole town was absolutely horrified when Dee Dee was found stabbed to death in her home in 2015. To make matters worse, Gypsy was nowhere to be found, and their joint Facebook account posted a message which declared, "That bitch is dead." The comments, as they always do, made everything worse. The poster went on to say, "I fucking slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet innocent daughter. Her scream was so fucking loud, lol." So what kind of unimaginable monster would murder then abuse and kidnap a helpless, developmentally challenged 19-year-old? Well, it was Gypsy all along. Gypsy Blanchard had killed her mother. Oh, and she wasn't a sick teenager at all. She was a perfectly healthy 23-year-old who was fully capable of walking, talking, and evidently planning a murder. In fact, Gypsy herself was unaware of her true age at the time, and her decision to murder her mother was the result of Dee Dee's nasty case of Munchausen syndrome. Dee Dee had been faking her daughter's all-sorted illnesses ever since Gypsy was a baby. As Gypsy grew, her mother shaved her head, fed her liquid nutrient supplements and tranquilizers, and forced her to use a wheelchair in public. Dee Dee reported a baffling variety of symptoms to different doctors, who helpfully prescribed medication and performed numerous surgeries, including one to Gypsy's eye muscles and one completely removing her salivary glands. When Gypsy's test came back negative, all the staff at the clinic became suspicious. Dee Dee dodged the bullet by simply stop going to that doctor. She also happily gamed charities when she could. At the time of her murder, they lived in a house built by Habitat for Humanity, complete with customized amenities like a hot tub to help with Gypsy's muscles. Trapped in her mother's madness, Gypsy was raised to go along with the deceptions, even when they caused her pain. However, as the years went by, to the surprise of no one, she gradually grew to resent her mother. Gypsy spent a lot of her time on the internet and eventually made a boyfriend, Nicholas Godejohn. Together, the two hatched a plan to free Gypsy of Dee Dee's grasp for good. Unfortunately, the plan wasn't to alert the authorities, but for Godejohn to enter their house and brutally murder Dee Dee with a serrated knife whilst Gypsy stood in the other room and listened. Police were tipped off after a friend of Gypsy's mentioned her online secret boyfriend. Gypsy was found in Godejohn's apartment. She wasn't in a wheelchair and in way better health than they feared. She took a plea deal for second-degree murder and is currently serving a 10-year sentence, while her boyfriend is still awaiting trial. 2 missing, identical Richards. In 2005, Alaskan Richard Bennett upped and vanished. He seemed like he wanted to disappear, having neatly distributed his belongings to his loved ones before he went. But still, no one knew where he went and why. That is, until a few months later, when his family found a body in the woods near his trailer. The head was missing, which everyone agrees could probably be attributed to wild animals, but the remains match Bennett's description, size, age bracket. He was even wearing the right clothes. Forensic anthropologists found a healed break in his shin, which they compared with x-rays from the time Bennett broke his leg in a motorcycle accident. It was a perfect match, and Bennett's family buried the body in 2006. But in 2004, another Richard Hills, had gone missing. Alaska is already one of the mysterious disappearances capital of America, but Hill's case was particularly odd. His crashed car was found with the key still in the ignition. His tracks went on for about a quarter of a mile and then just vanished. Although he had been running with a bad crowd, there was no indication that he was either killed or had intended to commit suicide, and since nobody could find any remains, the case went unsolved for around about 10 years. In a bizarre twist, the body which was found in Bennett's backyard wasn't him at all, it was Hills. As it turns out, Hills had also broken his leg in an older accident, and by a cruel twist of fate, the two breaks were almost identical. It didn't hurt that the two were roughly the same age, had the same build, wore similar clothes, and went missing in the same area within a short period of time. The mix-up was only discovered in 2014, after a forest fire on the Kenai Peninsula revealed the bones of a third missing person, and police started looking through the list of local disappearances, until they discovered some previously ignored DNA data suggesting that the body released to the Bennett family was not related to them. Further testing revealed that it was Hills, who had stumbled towards Bennett's property after his car crash, only to collapse and succumb to his injuries. As for Bennett, his fate remains a mystery, but it's probably not going to end well. The Batman of Los Angeles is nothing like you're picturing. In 1922, Fred Osterreich was shot dead in his Los Angeles mansion. The police found his wife, Wahlberger Dolly Osterreich, screaming in a wardrobe, which was locked from the outside. As the only living person in the house, Dolly quickly became the prime suspect. However, it was impossible for her to be the murderer. There was no way she could have locked herself in a wardrobe. It seemed destined to become one of those unsolvable cases that provoke retired detectives to build maniacal evidence wars in their houses. Although Dolly Osterreich had a lover, Otto Sandhuber, who had secretly lived in the attic of the house for years. This wasn't even the first secret attic the guy lived in. Before the Osterreichs moved to Los Angeles, Otto spent 10 years hidden away in the attic of their Milwaukee home. He began an affair with Dolly whilst working for Fred. When the neighbours became suspicious of his frequent visits, Dolly convinced him to quit his job and move into the attic. The life of Otto Sandhuber was not a glamorous one. Apart from the daily visits with Dolly, he spent his days in complete isolation, reading, sleeping on a small cot, drinking bathtub gin, and writing pulp fiction stories. During these years, Dolly was the only person Otto saw. He would later say that he was essentially her sex slave, and he loved her as a boy loves his mother. Although Fred was a heavy drinker, he eventually started to notice the strange noises, mysterious shadows, and occasionally missing a cigar that are the inevitable byproducts of a complete stranger spending years hiding in your home. Questioning his sanity, he decided that a change of scenery was in order. A move to LA didn't help, of course. Dolly simply made sure their new home had an attic and secretly moved Sandhuber in with them. One day, Sandhuber overheard Fred and Dolly having a violent argument. He charged downstairs, dual-wielding Fred's own guns, and fired 3 rounds into his chest. Then he locked Dolly in the cupboard and went back to the attic, where police completely failed to detect him. Dolly blamed her husband's death on a burglary. Everyone was let off the leash, and Otto could finally descend from his hiding hole. Otto carried on living as Dolly's personal attic sex toy, while she struck up a new relationship with her late husband's estate attorney, Herman Shapiro, and a businessman, Roy Klumb. Unfortunately, Shapiro became suspicious of Dolly when she gifted him an expensive watch which looked a whole lot like the one the burglar had stolen, and Klumb didn't have much care for the way Dolly casually asked him to get rid of the gun. To top things off, she even asked her neighbour to bury yet another one of his guns in his own garden. This may seem sloppy on Dolly's part, but remember, she once asked a guy to quit life and live in her attic. Klumb was the first to go to the police with his story, and Dolly was arrested in 1923. Unfortunately, being thick is no proof of murder, especially as the police were still unable to explain how she got locked in the wardrobe. But Dolly wasn't done asking bizarre things of men. She revealed Sandhuber's existence to Shapiro while in jail, begging him to buy shopping for a pet attic friend. It's a true statement to Dolly's charms that instead of blasting out a true glorious string of obscenities and marching to the nearest police station, Shapiro obliged. Sandhuber was delighted to finally have someone new to talk to, and told Shapiro basically everything. This finally proved to be Dolly and Sandhuber's undoing, as Shapiro went to the police with this information 7 years later, and only because he and Dolly broke up. The statute of limitations of manslaughter had expired, so everyone involved was off the hook. The papers called Sandhuber the Bat of Los Angeles, and Dolly lived the rest of her days as a free woman, enjoying her late husband's wealth. So there you go, that's the moral. You can ask a man to do just about anything, and as long as you're having sex with them, they'll do it. Or maybe the moral is, everything will work out fine if you decide to become somebody's secret sex slave.